All right, thank you all for coming to our next installment of the How To series. So just as a reminder, this is our series where we want to tell you guys about kind of the hidden curriculum of grad school and the research world, stuff that you're not going to get in any courses. And hopefully your mentors go over some of this with you too, but it's always nice to have a supplement. So today we have Rebecca Graves from the Health Sciences Library, and we really appreciate her expertise here. She's going to tell us how to select a journal for publication.
All right. Good afternoon. I can say that because it's officially afternoon. I am going to cover today journal metrics, tools for finding journals, and touch on predatory journals. I'm going to start with the metrics. I know that tools for journals polled higher in Charlene's poll, and thank you for answering that because that was helpful for me. But in my thinking, the metrics make it a little clearer where to look. So, that is what I'm going to be covering today in that order. Before I jump into it, does anybody have any comments, questions, anything you really want to make sure that I cover? And if anybody's online, if you put it in chat.
Q&A. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so, or put it in the Q&A. Yeah, so, and if you have questions throughout, feel free to, for those in the room, to just raise your hand or just, ask a question. And also could put it in the Q&A online, and there'll be time afterwards. I'm not gonna take the whole hour. So I do have a question for you. How many of you have published? Okay, so.
I got the name on the paper.
Yeah, got a name on the paper. Yeah, so. Excellent for getting published. So about 2/3 or at least a half of the room has published. So that's cool. All right, and it's always a changing market. So first, the metrics. So, and you're probably familiar with these, and I'm going to talk about tools for these and stuff. But I'll go over citations, ranking, indexes, and alternative metrics briefly. Of course, there's also peer review, like is the journal peer review, and there's also word of mouth, like how people value journals as well. But starting out with citations, the big one I'm sure everybody's heard of, yes, the impact factors. And I start out with that one because that one is actually from a company called Claravit. It used to be from another company called Thomson Reuters. But they are also called, there's a report, the JCR, or Journal Citation Report, is where you can find the impact factors. And journals that get an impact factor are indexed in the Journal Citation Report / Web of Science. So if they're not included in Web of Science, they're not going to have an impact factor. So that led to other groups or companies coming up with their own citation counts. One is through Scopus, which is the site score. And I have the verbal description of how they figure these out. There are actually formulas, and you can look on the websites for the formulas if you're interested in how they're done. This was originally started back in the day to help librarians decide which journals to purchase. Given their budget, given the people that use their library, which journals gave the most impact for the budget. So there's, is it the best metric? We could get a cup of coffee and talk about that, but it is one that's highly used. The impact factor, the journal citation reports, are used by the AAU, the American Association of American Universities, of which MU is a part, and so MU uses those metrics. So that's one thing to know is, what metrics does your institution use? Does your department use? If you're going for grant funding, what metrics do they want? So that's one reason why, okay, it's good to know how things are cited, how things are counted, and know which ones are important to you. Because some folks say, well, we don't care about the site scores. We're not going to count that. We only want impact factor. Or others might say, well, if your journal's not in Web of Science and therefore doesn't have an impact factor, but it's in the Scopus database, and it's got a ranking from there, or an impact factor citation count from there, we could use it. So just always check with your institution. And also if you have a career plan of where you want to go, check with the folks that you're aiming for, what they're counting, what's important to them. So this is just what it looks like. I picked the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and its impact factor is 6.5. Through Scopus, its site score is 12.4. You can see the numbers are wildly different. So another piece of all this is the numbers need to be in context. So if you are using the numbers, always keep a record of, I'm using this journal because it had a good impact factor, which is Journal of Citation, which is Clarivate. Don't just write the number down, because later you'll drive your future self will be going like, what does this mean? So know your metrics and where you got them from. The next one is ranking, and these 3 sources that I have on here are linked in the slides, so when you get the slides after the presentation, you can use these to link to them. They're also on our website. So JCR is the Journal Citation Reports, and Scopus gets you the citation count, or the site score. And there's another a database new to us called Dimensions, and this is actually provided by the MU Division of Research Innovation, and you can log in with your MU system login. And that one I haven't used as much. I'm still learning that myself, but if you have questions on it, you can follow up with me afterwards, or my colleagues, Rachel Alexander or Piper Brown Knightley, because they work with research and data. My other colleagues you could talk to as well, but Rachel and Piper focus on research. So ranking, if you're going to count how many times things have cited, and you want it to make sense, of course you're going to have a division or a specialty or a group of that. So you can see that for the same journal, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, rank by impact factor. So the category there is nutrition and dietetics, and they have 114 journals in that category, and out of it, this one is number 11 by impact factor. And so you can see that it's in the first quartile. So those are metrics that you can use and say, oh, this is a really high ranking journal. If I submit to this and my article gets accepted, I can brag about that. Note on that, any journal that gets indexed in Web of Science actually has some value. So even if you're in a lower quartile, you still have a good journal. So I would put that in there. Again, it all depends how competitive your field is and how competitive it is if you're going for funding or promotion. So you will have to make that decision. So the Scopus site score rank, they actually have 2 categories, one for nursing, nutrition and dietetics, and one for medicine miscellaneous. And each one has a different number of journals in it. One is 140, the other is 398, and you can see how the journal ranks in each of those. Again, you would have to state where you're getting if you're gonna report this out, say for promotion and tenure, you have to give where did you pull the metrics from? If you're looking for publishing, then you can just say, oh, okay, you can eyeball it and say, yes, I want to go with this journal. This fits with my goals. And next is indexing. So as I mentioned, to get an impact factor, a journal has to be in the Web of Science database. To get the site score, it's got to be in the Scopus database. There's also Medline, and I'll come back to that in a second. And then I put CINAHL, which is nursing, and there's other specialized databases. So, there's a database for PTSD, there's one for psychology, for education. So depending on what you're looking at, you could say, is it in the premier biomedical like Scopus / Embase? Is it Web of Science? Is it PubMed? Or maybe you're going to look at a specialized database, because those can give you, there's a certain amount of vetting that those organizations do. For example, Medline / PubMed is the National Library of Medicine, and a journal has to be in publication for 3 years before they will look at indexing it, because people can have good ideas about wanting to start a journal, but then having the money and the staff time to be able to keep it going. So they don't want to start indexing something if it's going to go away. And then a lot of institutions will also look at journals if they're going to index them. Do they follow guidelines for journals, such as how are they archiving their articles? Because that's something else to look at when you're looking for a journal to publish in. And a publisher is you don't want the journal to go out of production and then possibly your article gets lost, because who's archiving it? Who's keeping it? So that's another piece, is that the indexes are some of a hedge against that. You'd also look at the publisher as well. And I'm going to come back to the Medline is not PubMed. So I don't know how many of you know that, because we think of PubMed and Medline as the same thing. But if you think of Venn diagrams, which are in the news apparently, but if you draw a big circle, that's PubMed, and draw a circle within it, that's Medline. Because Medline's a database, and I am going to show what I mean about that. If you go to PubMed, and then in the lower right of the screen, you can select journals, which I have highlighted in a red circle, and that will take you to the catalog, to the back end of the database, as it were, and you can look for the journal that you're interested in. So I switch topics in my examples, and I'm looking at the Journal of Neuroscience. And when I pull it in, sure, it finds a record, and I can see the publisher. So the Society for Neuroscience, it's actually their official journal, so that's another thing to look at. Like, who's publishing it? Is it the association's or the institution's official journal? That's another plus green check for publishing. And then you want to look further down, and it says in Medline. So it's in the Medline database, and that's the original database for the system. And you can see that this journal with volume 1, issue 1, or number 1, from 1981 has been indexed, and it's got a hyphen with no end date. So they had indexed this in its entirety, which is good. You can also see it's in PubMed. Index Medicus is the print version, which no longer is getting printed, so any historian buffs. And then PMC is the PubMed central database, and this is why you can have things in PubMed that are not in Medline. Because you might all know that if you get an NIH grant or other government agency grants, you have to put your articles in PubMed Central. If an article goes in PubMed Central, it gets a PubMed record. So it can be discoverable. But it doesn't necessarily then get into the Medline database. So if you publish in a journal that's not in Medline, and you have to put it into PubMed Central, it will get a PubMed record, but it won't actually be in Medline. So that's one thing where it gets confusing. So if you want to say, well, I want to make sure this is indexed in Medline, actually dig all the way in, or ask me or one of my colleagues and say, hey, can you check and see if this journal's in Medline? And we can do that for you. Here's another example of one that is not. So here's one, Journal of Neuroscience and Neuropharmacology. And you can see that the publisher is Omics, and this is considered a predatory publisher. More on that later. And if you look at the in, it says in PubMed selected citations only, and then current indexing status, it's not currently indexed for Medline. And so they actually clearly say that the only articles were in PubMed Central in compliance with public access policy. So I just want to point that out because it can get really confusing when people are thinking, but it was in PubMed. It's like, well, doesn't mean it was officially indexed in the Medline database that PubMed is really the interface for. All right, alternative metrics. How many of you have looked at these before? Yes, no? Okay, so shaking heads. I didn't put on here ones where you can go to the publisher site and you can look at downloads and views. So those are alternative metrics to see who's looked at it, or well, not who, but how many times it's been looked at. How many times it's been downloaded. This is more on the article side as opposed to the journal side, but you could say one of the pieces I'll mention is that to find a good fit, you should look at some other articles in the journal. So if you look at the journal and say, I think this is a good fit for me, you should just pull up a couple of articles they've published, and you could look at their alternative metrics and get a feel like, are these are they getting consistently picked up in alternate places, such as blogs or policy. And this is from PlumX, which is incorporated into Scopus. So just one example. So you could come in and you could look at this and you could say like, oh, okay, the icon to me looks like a really vague tree frog kind of thing, or a newt's foot. And it's color coded, and on the far right is the color coding. So citations are orange, captures are purple, mentions are yellow, and social media is blue. And then they have the metrics detail, and they have down the list what they have. And so this one actually got mentioned in some policy. It got 9 mentions in policy, which would be pretty cool. So again, thinking of 2 things at once. One is promotion and tenure, or getting future jobs or funding. If you get mentioned in policy, that's pretty cool. That would be bragging rights, I would think. And then you could also look on the article level or the journal level to see, do the articles from that publisher get picked up by other sources? And you also have to decide, is that important to you? You might say, well, none of my funders, none of my, my department, my institution, they don't care. And in which case this would just be for you. But something to keep in mind when you're looking. Let's see. So now on to tools. So we have a guide on where to publish. So the resources I'm talking about are linked on that guide, and here's the link, the website, so you could actually type that in, libraryguides.missouri.edu/where to publish, all typed as one word. How many of you have heard of Jane? Anybody heard of okay, so we got one yes. So that's one where you can take text and paste it in, and I'll show you what that looks like. You can, of course, look at JCR and Scopus, SiteScore, and I'll loop back into that, and then dimensions. You can check that out to see which journals they put together by category. So here's the guide, again with the URL, and it has the links to the different tools, so you don't have to write them all down. You don't have to save them on your computer. There's also tabs on the left. So if you're looking at, predatory journals, retaining your rights, AAU metrics, you can pull that up later. And I'm going to go and show Jane. So Jane is actually, I find it relatively fun because you can take your abstract, you could take part of your document and just copy and paste it into the box, and then click Find Journals. It does give you the option to find authors or find articles, if that's of use. And then it'll come back with a list of journals that it judges to be a match, and it will show if they're indexed in Medline, so not just PubMed, but Medline. It'll also show open access from the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and if it's in PubMed Central. And then it's got the article influence, which is another citation rank, and I think they use the eigenfactor, which I believe is actually out of, not working. It's eigenfactor is based on Web of Science, the Clarivate data. So just to look at what they show, so I picked the second one, European Journal of Pharmacology, for this example, and it shows 3 articles that might be similar to yours so that you can see, oh, how much of a match is this? So this is one way to find a match, to find potential articles. Another way is if you go, so now I switched and I went to journal citation reports, and I'll talk a bit like how do you actually get here, but there are links throughout this slideshow to this. So if you haven't used this before, you can look by a specific journal. So if you go into JCR, and put in a journal title. So maybe somebody gave you the journal, maybe it's one you read, maybe it's one that's important in your field. So you select the journal title, and then it takes you to the record if it's indexed here, and this one is, and it's under the category of neurosciences, and then you can scroll down for the information. And you can see, yes, it's a 4.4, which is a good impact factor overall, but again, you'd have to look by discipline, because for some disciplines, 4.4 is high. For some, it's average, and others, it's low. But you have to check, and how you can check is if you keep going down, you can look at the rank. And again, it'll show how many journals are in this category, and it'll show where this one ranks. So you can see by year how this one's ranked, if it's going up, if it's holding steady, if it's going down. So that gives you an idea. And I'm going to go back. You can also look by category. So if you're like, but I don't know a specific journal. So you could go into JCR, and instead of looking at journals, which is the first tab right after the database name, you can do categories. And if you scroll down through the categories, there's clinical medicine, there's other ones as well. But when you click on clinical medicine, then it opens up the subcategories, and I scroll down, and I'm looking at neurosciences for this one, to keep it consistent with this example. And it's got the 310 journals, and I can look at those. And so this will give me the journals I can look at, and they rank them. The default is the journal impact factor comes up high. And so you can see that the top one is 28. The impact factor is 28, so it makes the other one at 4 seem lower, but you can see that with only like 7 on the screen, it drops to 14 pretty fast. And you could scroll down through here and take it. So depending on your research, depending upon your I'm trying to think how to say this, how new you are to the field, you may think, well, maybe it's not a fit for Nature Review's neuroscience, or maybe because their impact factor is so high and it makes them one of the top journals and makes them really desirable, maybe I'm not going to shoot for that one. I might shoot for one that's a little further down that's still a good match. So that's another one to be strategic about. It's like, well, wouldn't it be great to have that impact factor, but maybe you're not going to get in because the competition is really strong. All right, so skipping to Scopus. So here, if you can search in here, as you probably all know, if you click sources, then you can also look by subject area. So I have that selected, and I selected neurology clinical and neurology neuroscience. And this gave me 626 journals. And again, I could look through here to see this list. There might be some overlap on the journals, and you can change how it's ranking them. You can change the default. They are going to do the site score from the top to most to highest. I scroll down. This one, Scopus, also gives you some filters. So you can say, give me the first quartile, or I'll shoot for the second quartile, and then you only want journals. You don't want conferences, et cetera. So you can use that to narrow it down. So it gives you a list to pick from. And this is just looking at a specific journal that I picked from the list, the Journal of Clinical Neuroscience. You can see its site score. They also give other metrics. They give the SJR, which is a third party called Cymago, which takes the Scopus data, and they generate information about the journals. So some people use the SJR to vet them and rank them. So again, it's all knowing which metrics are important to you and which metrics are important in your department. And again, just showing how this journal ranks in the different categories. And if you are looking at this, if you're looking for publishing, you may look for just one particular category. Like if you're looking, well, I want clinical neurology versus neuroscience, so that's what I'm going to look at. If you are listing this on promotion and tenure or application, I would list all the categories. I wouldn't just cherry pick which ones. Unless they want you to. I would just say, well, this journal comes up in these categories and it ranks these different ways. And then you can also search by title, of course. So if you have a particular one in Scopus, you can pull it up and you can select the journal and look at the information and select it that way. So from our website, if you don't want to actually do all the work yourself, you can go to our website, library.muhealth.org, and in the lower center of the page, Journal Impact Factors, you can select that link, and it gives you two options. One will take you to the journal citation report, so that's how you can get there. And then the other one is the journal metrics tool. And you can select that, and you can search by journal title. So I have an American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And I skipped a screen where it says, do you want this journal? I found a match, and I selected it. And so now I have this result. And so it's saying, does this journal have an impact factor? Yes, it does. Here it is. Is it in Medline? And yes, it is. So not just PubMed, but Medline. And then is it in Scopus, et cetera? And you can scroll down. There's a couple of more fields on here. So that could be another quick way to vet a journal. And then, of course, you want to go to the journal itself and look at the aims and scopes, or aim and scope. And this one, because it's the society's journal, it's a known society, and it's Elsevier, I would say it's reputable. If you're not sure if it's reputable, like if you're like, I don't know sure about this journal, I haven't heard about this association or whatever, you can take a look at the editorial team and you can actually reach out to them and you can contact one of the editors and say, do you actually edit this journal? You can look at who the publisher is. I mean, Elsevier is a major respectable publisher, but even they have done some things that were wrong in the past. So, you know, it's always worth taking a look at things. And again, you can always ask us at the library to say, hey, I'm not sure about this journal. I think it might be reputable, but I can't tell. And that takes me into predatory journals. So this is what I would call a slidegement. I got this from a person named Nancy Durante, who said slideguments are documents that aren't meant to be read in the presentation, but read later. And so I have the link to the article. So Elmore and Weston did a really good job of writing about predatory journals, and this chart is really good. So I didn't see any reason to reinvent it. So the link is up there to the journal, and this is on here. So these are things to look for. So if you're looking at a journal to choose it to publish in, maybe you got an email from them, or maybe somebody recommended it, or you just came across it. You can go down this list and say, what does it check off? Does it pass these answers? And actually, I didn't want to go there. And one thing I wanted to talk about it a little bit before I wrap up is the difference between open access and there's public access. Public access is a policy from the National Institutes of Health that if you get funding from them, your products of research have to be available to the people who funded it, AKA the taxpayers. So you have to make your work publicly accessible, and which for NIH means putting it in PubMed Central within 12 months of publication. And there's a lot of information on that, and we can help you with that if you have questions. Open access is actually a publishing model. So traditionally it was subscription model in which the reader paid or the reader's institution paid. Then it was started to say, well, what about the people who can't afford the subscriptions or the institutions who can't afford the subscriptions? Because some of them are quite expensive. So then it was like, well, we should have it open access and should flip who's paying for this. And so then it got flipped to the authors / the institutions still are paying. And we could, again, get a cup of coffee or tea and talk about whether this was successful or not. But just because something's open access doesn't mean it's predatory. A lot of journals actually have a hybrid model where you can do the traditional publishing model of subscriptions, and you can look at their copyright information. Like say, my funder requires me to have this in PubMed Central or another repository within X amount of months. And you can check their website to see if that works. And if they say, yes, you can do that within 12 months, then you could go with the traditional one. And you don't necessarily have to have the fee for open access. Some people do want it to be immediately available, and that's the open access fee, and that can actually be pretty pricey. So that's something to look at. Like, do you get support for that? Is it built in? If you have grant funding, is it built into that and stuff? But I did want to clarify that public access and open access are related, but different. And they can lead you to decide which journal you're picking, but don't necessarily mean that it's predatory. All right. And so questions, just if anybody has any, and just to wrap up, so the link to our guide, the link to the journal impact factors, the page where you can get either to the JCR or to that form, where it'll calculate it for you or pull up the information for you, and then our contact information. So you can contact me or my colleagues, particularly Rachel or Piper, and also there's Tara, Karen, and Diane. So any questions?
The citation types broken down. For example, this journal has been citing by this number of books, this number of review articles, this number of research articles, because it's different, I would say, weight on how.
So looking at where the citations come from, so whether they come from research articles or review articles or books. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to have to look at it because I'm not sure if Web of Science or Scopus breaks it down, like where the citations are coming from. I don't know. I mean, unlike the alternative metrics where they break it down from like blogs or Wikipedias, et cetera, or news. So if I can find anything on that, I'll let Charlene know and you can push it out.
Yes, yeah. Everyone who registered for this will send out any answers, yeah. I was wondering, okay, for people who might watch this video later and people in the audience thinking about the library as a resource, and you've mentioned some things that we can contact you with, and so like at what points in the process can they come and ask, oh, can you help me with this step? And is there anything that you definitely don't help with?
Okay, so you can, let's see, at what point in the process, if you have an article that you're looking for, you can come to us. I mean, if you have one that you're working on or have finished and you're looking for places to publish, you can come to us and say, hey, can you give me some suggestions of where to publish? And we will look through the different rankings and the different metrics and come back with a list and say, here's some places that you might want to consider. If you need it, like one thing is that depending on workflow, I mean, it's sooner's better than later. Like if you're like, I need to get this published yesterday, which happens, but if you can do it sooner, that would be great. But I mean, pretty much anytime you're looking for a journal, you can do that. If you're looking for, so if it was, so finding where to publish. If you have questions, like if maybe you do or don't have an article that you are looking to publish, but you just got an email from a publisher and you're like, hey, maybe I want to keep this in a folder for future reference, you can always ask us to vet it and say, that's another thing we could do is say, do you think this journal is reputable? Because I've had some faculty ask me that. And one of them, I said, yeah, this journal, as far as I can tell, is reputable. But then there was one that I found, I was like, oh no, because in it, and I gave specifics and cited my sources to say, this one looks clearly predatory. So, if you can do better on finding it. So we can help with that. And we can give some information about copyright. But we're not copyright lawyers, so if you have deep questions on copyright, or if you had like serious concerns on it, then you might have to go to, switch to the legal side. But if you're like, is this a traditional copyright agreement? What do I need to do for my grant funding, et cetera? We can help out with that. So,
I have another question. So for is any transparency, let's say X journal, the acceptance rate, how many, if what you have to, where your odds are being published, if I submit, what are my chances? Just if you consider random submission to be accepted.
Yeah, so acceptance rates, yeah, so some journals accept pretty much anything, and then a few, and I mean, that's one thing about predatory ones is they tend to accept it, but give no further assistance, you know, for editing and stuff. A lot of journals have not been forthcoming with their acceptance rates. They can be hard to find. That's starting to change. So some journals will have it on their website, and so you can Google it. We do look for acceptance rates for faculty because we've helped faculty with finding metrics when they're going up for promotion and tenure. We don't have any, but we keep it locked up because, you know, people don't want to share it. So we're like saying we keep it confidential. But if you have a particular journal, you can reach out to us because we might actually have information on that. We might say, oh yeah, we were told by the editor that the acceptance rate 2 years ago for that journal was X. So we might have the information for you. So if you're interested in that, you can contact us on it with a specific journal. And that is something good to know is what is their acceptance rate? Because if their acceptance rate's really low, you know, maybe you want to pick another journal. If you're like, I need to get this published, I need to get this information out there for whatever reason. Another thing to look at, and this usually isn't mentioned on their website, you kind of have to look at their publications, like accepted for publication and published, you know, so, because somebody mentioned to me that they found an article that it took 2 years from acceptance to when it was published. Usually it's 6 months to a year. But that might be something, if you're looking at a journal and you're looking at the about information and you're looking at a couple of like 2 to 5 articles to see if yours is a match, check the dates on them, like when they were accepted and when they were published, to see if, I mean, it could be all over the place, depending on the topic and who the peer reviewers were and the authors themselves, how quickly they got back on it, but that might be something. But as far as acceptance rates, that is something good to look at, and we might have the information if you need it. Anything else?
Doesn't look like we have any unanswered questions online. Anyone else here have questions? Okay. All right, thank you guys so much for coming. We hope to have more of these in the future. Please let me know if you have topics that you would like covered. I know we have a lot of people who've been requesting on how to apply for a foundation grant, so I'm working on getting a speaker for that. And then also I wanted to let you guys know that on September 10th, we're having an event here in the Next Gen building, which is gonna have a component of looking at career pathways in tech transfer and biotech. So we're gonna actually have people from that industry come and be here in the building, and part of the event is they're gonna look at people's resumes and give feedback and say like, oh, if you wanna apply in this company, like you need to change your resume in this way. And there's gonna be some other sessions too. So please keep an eye on your emails for that. A few save the dates have gone out, but you should see more, but that's on September 10th. And if you don't see anything about that and you wanna go, please email me. Charlene Emerson, you've probably seen other emails from me. Okay, and thank you so much. This was very informative. Yeah, no, the predatory journal stuff, I think people need to keep a bigger eye on that. So yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, the open access was a good idea, and I think it can help people get to data, but it also opened up, I think it made it easier for people to be predatory.
Yeah.
So, double-edged sword there.
Yeah, it was in spirit. It was a good
Yes,
idea.
in spirit was a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. All right, and then people can contact you if they have any questions.
Yes, so through email, through our website, contact me directly or any of my colleagues.
Yeah, and the slide.
Some fees some journals receive to publish it.
Yeah, so for the open access fees can be really high. One of the journals I was looking at, it might have been the nutrition journal. I think their open access fee for immediate. So you get your article accepted, and then they say, okay, you do these edits, and then they're like, okay, we're going to publish it. You know, if you do the open access tomorrow, it was $5,000, which is serious money. I mean, if you look at the money in the data world and publishing world with this like Elsevier and Wolters Kluwer and stuff, it's serious money behind it, and then you can see why. So, yes, so that's one reason why, I mean, why we could have a cup of coffee and talk about how that all works.
Okay, all right. Thank you guys.